We are on the hour. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the second webinar of the IFRS Foundation regarding our consultation paper on sustainability reporting. I'm Lee White. I have the privilege of being the Executive Director at the IFRS Foundation. The purpose of this webinar is to provide an opportunity for engagement regarding the consultation paper on sustainability reporting, and importantly to hear directly from two of the trustees of the task force involved with that work. The format of the webinar will be, after my welcoming, we'll have a 10-minute overview of the key elements of the paper, and then that will follow. Following that will be about a 40-minute moderator question and answer session. The consultation paper was published on the 30th of September this year, and you have the opportunity to provide responses to that paper up until the 31st of December. During this period, the trustees are listening and learning. They have posed 11 questions in the paper and certainly are inviting comment on each of those questions, some of which we'll explore a little bit further through this webinar. Now, if I may just simply do some brief introductions, we have, as I mentioned, two of the trustees, both of whom involved on the task force with us today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Lucrezia Reichlin. She's a professor of economics at the London Business School, chair and co-founder of Now Casting Economics Limited, chair of the European Corporate Governance Institute. She has a PhD in economics from New York University, and previously she was the Director General of Research at the European Central Bank. Lucrezia has been the chair of the trustee task force undertaking this work. I would also like to introduce Larry Leva. Larry is the former Global Vice Chairman of Quality, Risk and Regulatory Matters at KPMG International. He had a 40-year career with KPMG, undertaking numerous leadership positions, living and working within and outside of the United States. Larry has a degree in business administration at the University of Buffalo, State University of New York. Larry is also a member of the AICPA. So, as I mentioned, we will start with an overview of the paper, and I'll pass now to Lucrezia to do that, please.
Thank you, Lee, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. The first slide, please. As Lee said, the purpose of the consultation is to identify the demand from stakeholders in the area of sustainability reporting and understand what the Foundation could do in response to that demand. The initiative has to be understood in the context of the IFRS Foundation's 5-year review of its strategy, which started in January 2019. The trustees are providing a 90-day consultation period consistent with previous invitations to comment on the IFRS Foundation's strategic reviews. This document is the result of a long process involving pre-consultation with stakeholders, exchange of views with trustees and the ISB, the input also of a high-level advisory group chaired by Peter Pratt, former executive board member of the European Central Bank. Let me highlight the key elements of the design of the consultation paper. First of all, the involvement of the IFRS in sustainability reporting must be demand-driven. We propose a number of options, as you will see, but we will not expand our remit unless there is a consensus internationally that we should. The paper formulates a number of high-level questions. The first one is whether there is a need for a global set of internationally recognized sustainability reporting standards. We believe that this is like the first question that has to be asked in a sort of hierarchical order of the question. So if the answer to that question is yes, then the second natural question is, should the IFRS Foundation play a role in setting these standards and expand its standard setting activities in this area? And if not, what approach should be adopted? Then there are specific questions on how this could be done with the IFRS leadership. And most importantly, and I really want to stress that, what are the requirements for success in case the consultation would say, go ahead. Slide 2, please. Let me now talk about our finding in the pre-consultation, which inform the paper that is now the object of the formal consultation. First, we found that the demand for sustainability reporting is growing, and so is the demand for consolidation. A lot of important work has been done in this area, but the landscape is fragmented with many different metrics now available for companies to consider. Often these metrics are inconsistent or not comparable. So this is the demand, growing and urgent demand. But also the supply side is important, and the supply side is in transition. The standard setters in this area are also calling for harmonization and for proceeding from just recommendation to a next stage in order to achieve global auditable standards. Most importantly, also, there are regional initiatives which are ongoing with a high level of ambitions, both in terms of providing a taxonomy and standards. And I'm talking here about the European Union recent initiatives, but not only. So I will summarize this by, as in the slides, growing and urgent demand, a supply side in transition, need for consistency in reporting and comparable information. Next slide, please. In this context, we have identified a call for the IFRS to play a role. And I would like just as a matter of an example, to quote the IFA. Here in the slides, you see the quotations. The IFRS Foundation, with an enhanced remit and composition, should create an international sustainability standards board. Also, Accountants in Europe, a sustainability standards board could be established within the current IFRS Foundation structures. It will be overseen by the IFRS Foundation Trustees. So these are just two examples of what I'm talking about. So we are now assessing this demand, this call for the IFRS to play a role more widely. And there are several reasons that are tentatively identified of why the IFRS would be suitable for taking this role. First of all, is its governance, combining the input of regulators and the private sector. Second is its reputation in standard setting and in due processing. And third is the possibility of maintaining the connectivity with financial account standard setting that the leadership of the IFRS Foundation would provide. So then we propose, next slide please, we asked to consider a number of options. The first is to maintain the status quo. The second is to facilitate existing initiatives for consolidation. And the third, which is the option that we prefer as trustees, but we are asking you to consult on, is to create a sustainability standard board under the umbrella of the IFRS Foundation. So this board will be under the umbrella it would be part of our three-tier structure: monitoring board, trustees, and then this new board. The new board will operate alongside the ISB, and of course we'll have to start new work with new expertise, building on the excellent work of existing sustainability initiatives. But of course, every expansion of the IFRS remit carries risk. So we need to be clear about the conditions for success if we were going to follow option 3. And so we ask stakeholders to comment on this condition for success. Let me state the most important ones. First of all, achieving sufficient global support. Second, working with regional initiatives. Third, ensuring adequacy of governance structure, achieving the appropriate technical expertise, achieving the level of separate funding required also to protect the ISB, effective synergies with financial reporting, and then ensuring current missions, that the current mission of the IFRS and its resources are not compromised. Let me get into more specific issues. The consultation asks to comment on the scope of sustainability. Our recommendation is to go for a climate-first approach. We consider, and this is actually the feedback we got also in the pre-consultation, that this is actually the most important element of the ESG broader sustainability discussion. But we also recognize that issues related to climate are possibly linked to other aspects of sustainability, social and governance. So we remain open to expand the scope at a later stage, but we recommend to start with a narrower focus, climate first, as I define it. Also, we asked to comment on the approach to materiality. We recommend to keep the current focus of the ISB, which is an investment focus. So considering standards which have an immediate impact on the values of the companies. But we recognize that the other aspect of materiality could also be important. That is what the action of companies on the environment imply, and the second aspect of materiality is probably related very strongly with the first. So we recognize that would be possibly difficult to distinguish between the two, but we think that it's important to start with a narrow approach, but remaining open to learn and possibly expand at a later stage. Finally, we asked to comment on how to achieve assurance. So to build an assurance framework for sustainability information similar to that we have for financial statements. So two factors I like to stress. The first, can I have this next slide, please, is that the IFRS, if the IFRS would go ahead with the Sustainability Standard Board, as option 3 recommends, this board would have to build on the important work by the main standard setting organization, the five big organizations, and here I'm talking about the TCFD, the IRC, the CDSB, the GRIs, and the SASB, and the CDP. Okay, so I mean there are 5 standard settings, as you know, and then important work also being carried on by the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. So we will have to start from work which is already there, and this is actually good news that there is something we could build on. The second important consideration is how such a standard board, if it had to go ahead, how would relate with regional initiatives. We recognize that in the area of sustainability, different jurisdictions may want to go at different speed, and this is because of specific features of legislation or public policy. So we believe that we need to maintain a certain level of flexibility. So we need a core of global standards, but these core of global standards should not get into in the way of more initiative, more possibly ambitious initiatives by some jurisdictions. It is important that the global standards would be coherent with a broader and more ambitious set of standards, and that the connectivity and the dialogue will maintain. So here is what I mean when I say providing a global platform for regional initiatives. Next slides, please. So let me get back to the question and their general specific orders. I already mentioned that the questions, how they are formulated in the paper, they go from the very general to the more specific. As I said, so the first question is there a need for global sustainability standards? Should the IFRS Foundation play a role? That's the second question. Is a new sustainability standard board within the IFRS Foundation an appropriate approach? That's our option number 3. And what are the views on requirement for success? So we view this as the most important questions. And, as described, then we have a number of more specific questions on scope, on materiality, etc. Let me finish by just describing the timeline of this process. As Lee has already mentioned, the consultation paper was published on 30th September 2020. We are now in the middle of the consultations. We are organizing a number of outreach initiatives, not only this webinar, but also meetings, also conferences. We believe that this big effort in the outreach is really the condition for the legitimacy of this exercise. The comment deadline is on the 31st of December 2020, and then from Q1 2021, the trustees will analyze the comment that we had received and discuss the next step. With that, I would conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucrezia. We will now move to the moderated Q&A. We have approximately 1,400 participants registered for this webinar. You are able to, through the webinar, submit questions. My team will then be able to group those questions together in terms of themes, and we'll be able to explore those in greater detail for you. We did receive questions up front as well, so for those that are on this webinar who did do that, thank you very much. And Larry, I'd like to come to you in the first instance. I heard from Lucrezia about the approach adopted by the trustees as being a demand-driven one, and I would welcome your thoughts as to the meaning or the sense around that style of approach, please.
Thank you, Lee, and good day, everybody. So as Lucrezia mentioned, our first question asks whether there is a need for a globally recognized set of sustainability standards, and if so, whether the IFRS Foundation should play a role. I can tell you that we are very open-minded as to whether and how to proceed. We do not want to add to the confusion and complexity that already exists today, nor to compete with the already established organizations. As Lucrezia mentioned, prior to issuing the consultation paper, several stakeholders have suggested that the IFRS Foundation get involved in sustainability reporting, given our proven track record of setting financial reporting standards. We are keen to hear the views from all stakeholders around the world, from developed and developing countries, from investors, academia, business, regulatory, policymakers, the accounting profession, and the broader ESG community. We were also very keen for the Board of Trustees to make an informed decision, hence the extensive outreach during the consultation period, for example, this webinar. If there is no demand for the IFRS Foundation to get involved, we simply will not. So it really is demand-driven.
Thank you, Larry. We also heard a bit around the supply side and the supplied side being in transition. I'd like to just explore that a little bit further with you, Larry. Some have suggested that the existing guidance, current ESG guidance, is meeting needs, and therefore, by response, there's really no need for the IFRS Foundation to be further involved. How would you sense that, or how would you respond to those comments?
Well, prior to issuing the consultation paper, our task force did a considerable amount of outreach to a wide range of stakeholders. And the message we heard fairly consistently was that climate change was the most urgent issue needing to be addressed. So we proposed that the new board, if we have a new board, could prioritize climate-related risk because of its urgency. But also we could address other environmental priorities. And many of the stakeholders have suggested, some quite strongly, that at a later stage, the SSB might adopt a broader scope that includes social and governance factors as well. And the existing organizations have really done a terrific job. So we're not looking to add to the confusion, and we are open-minded as to scope, and it is really important for us to hear from everyone.
Thank you, Larry. Also, just a little bit further around current situation, and we again touched on this in the paper, but why is the IFRS Foundation best suited to seek to harmonise global sustainability reporting and potentially not another organisation?
Well, as we noted, we do not want to add to the complexity by having yet another set of sustainability standards. So it really is important for us to hear the views of others. But having said that, I think we have a lot to offer. Within the context of financial reporting, we have a proven track record. IFRS standards are high quality, are globally accepted. We have a well-developed governance structure and a well-established due process that leads to a highly collaborative model with very good transparency and very effective stakeholder participation. In addition, the growing interconnectivity between financial and non-financial reporting would lead to useful synergies in staff expertise and resources that would benefit both boards. And I think the synergies could be very significant. So again, if there is no demand, we will maintain the status quo, which would be the first option in the paper that Lucrezia walked through.
Thank you, Larry. Quite a few questions coming in, some in some fairly close detail, so I'll try and get some level of grouping these a little bit further together. One that not a complete surprise that people are interested in is, if an SSB was to be created, the Sustainability Standards Board, trustees thinking on how will that actually be funded. Now, I know that's further down the line, but it's a question that's been coming through.
So funding is obviously critically important because the contributions and the funding that we have received to date were for a specific purpose. They were for preparing and continue to refine a global set of financial reporting standards. So we can't just simply say that, we thank you for that money, and now we'll start using that money for another purpose. We have to use that money for its intended purpose, for what it was contributed for, which was a global set of financial reporting standards. So if we were to embark on this mission, broader scope to include sustainability standards, we would need to get funding for that purpose and not simply repurpose what we already have. So it really will be important for us to develop that additional funding source. It's important for that source to be from a wide source so that we maintain our independence. And it's one of the critical success factors that Lucrezia covered earlier.
Yes, it is in paragraph 31 of the paper. Thank you, Larry. The next theme, if I could come back to you, please, Lucrezia, is around materiality. as you rightfully referred to, the paper mentions an approach to materiality that's geared towards an investor audience. Does this mean there'll be a strict financial materiality approach if the new board is created?
As I mentioned, our proposal is to start with a narrow focus, but we recognize that in this area it would be very difficult to distinguish between one direction of materiality and the other direction. And this is in fact what comes also from research on this area. So in terms of, so I think that, it would be wise to start from a relatively narrow focus, but then remain open to build on that core. And in that respect, we can learn also from other initiatives which are adopting a double materiality view. So again, the logic of this document and our recommendation is to start narrow, but look at these issues in a dynamic way and build from that narrow core.
Thank you, Lucrezia. Larry, I might come back to you now, if I may. A theme I'd like to explore, probably which comes back to some of your career experiences around assurance or even a narrow auditing. And I think the question being posed is, how can the information provided by companies through sustainability-related disclosures be assured?
Well, one of the things that we're doing really well on the financial reporting side is the IASB. The IASB has a very good relationship with the International Auditing and Assurance Board, very good relationship with the auditing profession. Mm-hmm. There's good communications as standards are being developed on the financial reporting side to make sure that they are considering, the IASB is considering issues on the auditing side so that the standards that are issued will be able to be properly audited. And I would think that similarly, any new sustainability board would want to make sure that they have good communications with the IAASB, as well as not just the auditing profession, but also with other technical experts in the various sustainability fields that have the capability of providing assurance. So I think, that would be a critical part of the standard setting process. And I think we all agree that having, an appropriate level of assurance on the information that is provided really enhances the value of that information. And there's been a lot of, criticism that there's some greenwashing going on. Mm. And I think, having the information that is provided be subject to outside third-party assurance would really add to the credibility of the information being reported and enhance the comparability of that information as well.
Thank you, Larry. Some questions have been coming through around relationships with different groups that we may or may not have had engagement with today. Lucrezia, if I could come to you about engagement, and I think there was a reference to it in your pack and the paper, just about the engagement with the work of the TCFD. What's occurred there?
Well, the TCFD, I believe that the TCFD have done an incredible adopted by a large number of companies. So we are in excellent relationship with the TCFD, and the TCFD being a task force rather than a standard setter institutions, I think it would be normal to think that if the new sustainability board would be formed, then some of the human capital and the experience of the TCFD would be absorbed by the new board. Of course, the new board will not passively adopt whatever is being given to them, but it is inconceivable to think that it would not base its work on what exists already, has proven to be successful.
Thank you. Larry, we've got some remarks flowing through about the times back in the early 2000s when the foundation was set up and the important role that IOSCO played at that time to assist with the work of the ISB. So questions have been asking around engagement with regulators. Has there been engagement with IOSCO in particular?
We have been in contact with IOSCO. IOSCO has established a sustainability task force, and our task force has been in touch with them. We are, really encouraged by the contact we've had with them so far. They have also made an open statement that was very positive in terms of the IFRS Foundation potentially getting involved in sustainability. And I think, more broadly, IOSCO is absolutely critical to the mission of having a global set of sustainability standards. In the same way that back in 2000, they were absolutely critical to getting us off the ground, really, in terms of having a global set of financial reporting standards by mandating, in many cases, a requirement to use IFRS standards. That has been absolutely key in how, from a financial reporting standards perspective, we are now in 140 countries. So I think the engagement with IOSCO is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Larry. Lucrezia, earlier in your presentation, you made reference outside of TCFD to the other 5 organisations that have been involved in producing guidance. How do you see how the board and the foundation would work with these existing initiatives with sustainability reporting?
Again, I think that we will necessarily build on the work of those organizations which have been active for years and have laid the foundations of what we're trying to do today. It has to be recognized that these organizations have different focus and sometimes are broader, sometimes are narrower. So there is not an immediate overlap. So what I think is conceivable is that again we would maybe absorb some of those that knowledge, but at the same time allowing this organization maybe to evolve into something perhaps broader or addressing other aspects of sustainability. So again, we're not competing with these organizations. We are
Yes.
The idea is just to build a consolidator in this kind of very complex landscape.
Thank you, Lucrezia. And if I could come to you again, I know it's an area you covered, but we're getting lots of questions around the engagement between, if the Sustainability Standards Board is created, how that then works and engages with the regional initiatives. Would you be able to provide a bit more of the task force's thinking in that area, please?
Yes, I think this is a very important question, and it's a key ingredient for success. The framework that we will be putting together, which would combine the regional initiatives with a global aspiration. So our aspiration is global. This is where we have a potential importance in this, in this area, because we are a global organization. And capital markets are global. So, therefore, there is a big motivation for going global. On the other hand, as I mentioned before, this is an area in which legal frameworks, public policy,
yes,
matter. And it will be very unrealistic to think that the whole world will have the same policy in the area, for example, of climate change. So I think we would have to define a governance which would allow flexibility for some jurisdictions to go faster, for example, but at the same time retain a global common standards, which is congruent with maybe narrower, but congruent with the broader. So again, flexibility, but at the same time a global aspiration. And, this is what we are aspiring to.
Very good, thank you. Larry, some questions have flowed through after the last questions around the relationship with regulators and IOSCO, around the theme of, is there a likelihood or an intention to make the sustainability standards mandatory? And if that is the case, how would that be accomplished?
Well, Lee, we don't, even on the financial reporting side, we don't have the ability to mandate anything. Quite honestly, we need to rely on the jurisdictions to mandate and require our standards be applied properly and fully. So the relationship that we have with IOSCO, with policymakers in many jurisdictions, is something that we hope that if we get involved, we would be able to leverage with the goal that that the standards that we would issue by a new sustainability standards board would be mandated by the jurisdictions, by the local regulators, policymakers, whatever is depending on the country. So we are highly dependent on leveraging our credibility, that we have an appropriate due process to issue, quality standards, and that again, the regulators, policymakers, legislators, etc., in a given jurisdiction would mandate those standards. We don't have the ability on our own to do so.
Thank you. A number of questions flowing on then about relationships with the ISB. I think, Larry, you might have covered this in the last, but I'll ask it anyway. I think it's a natural flow on from your earlier comments. Will all the countries currently using IFRS standards also consider using the work of the SSB?
Well, we certainly hope so, right? Because we've had great success on the financial reporting side, 140 countries. If we can get 140 countries or most of those countries to also fully be applying standards coming out of a new sustainability standards board, that would go a long way towards the standardization, consistency, and comparability that everybody's calling for in terms of sustainability. So yes, hopefully.
Thank you. Lucrezia, the discussion and the focus around the potential to create a sustainability standards board, will this impact the work of the ISB, and what would be the impact particularly around the project on management commentary?
I think the work of the ISB on the management commentary is very important, and it will continue to go ahead. We see the new sustainability board as having a high degree of independence from the work of the ISB. However, with some connectivity, as was stressed also by Larry. And for that, we have to design a governance which would allow, both the independence and the connectivity. We have started reflecting upon that, but, we will also have to see how the consultations go. Eventually, what becomes material financially will have to become object of the work of the ISB. But, in terms of, what we need to build, what we would need to build the standards on sustainability, also in terms of competence, and in terms of the type of people that we would need, in terms of, we would need more scientists, more economists, maybe, so that would be quite a different type of work.
Yes, thank you. Larry, just with a similar area, just your remarks or thoughts of what you've heard about interconnectedness between the ISB and the potential of the Sustainability Standards Board and how that might develop over time.
The group of five that Lucrezia mentioned in her opening remarks has put together a paper that I really encourage everyone to read. It's a terrific piece of work that talks about the different roles that the current that the group of five organizations play today, the different stakeholders that they're effectively talking to, and the information that is being provided. And they talk about a building block approach to that effort. And they also have this concept of dynamic materiality, which I think is really key, where information today that may not be required, for example, in the financial statements, but may be material to understanding the operations of a company, and also to the extent that a company is impacting on the broader environment and society. That's yet another level of potential materiality. How this information over time can either move very slowly between these different levels of materiality, if you will, or could also move quite quickly. For example, in areas such as carbon emissions may be something that is not currently required to be accounted for in the financial statements, but if regulation or legislation comes into play, then the level for a carbon tax, for example, then all of a sudden information that may have been outside of the financial statements now is required in the financial statements because a law has been passed or a regulation has been passed. So, the expertise needed to monitor these different, stakeholder requirements, different areas of information, would provide a real synergy if you can have these experts supporting both an IASB and a new sustainability standards board, for example. I think there'd be a lot of value there. I should also, last point I'll make in this area is Nick Anderson, an IASB board member, has written a terrific article addressing some of the important climate and environmental issues that already need to be considered for financial reporting purposes. And that article can be found on our website.
Thank you very much, Larry. I'm conscious of time, and it seems to have moved through very quickly. The last question, if I may pose to either you, Larry, or Lucrezia, we're getting a few questions through just about process. They saw earlier the time frame, but the questions, or the spirit of the question is, given the nature of the sense of urgency with climate, is how quickly could a new board for sustainability actually be established? I don't know if either of you have a remark to pass on that.
Well, I would say that we could actually move relatively quickly, provided that the message that we get from the consultation is clear, of course.
Understood.
And so the trustee, in principle, can start working immediately, at the beginning of January. And, and then there will be the issue of, financing and putting, the board together, which will mean, hiring people and so on. But fortunately, as we discussed earlier, we have already, some work to build on and some actual capabilities in terms of expertise, people, and so on. The TCFD, as mentioned, but also other organizations. So, I mean, if the willingness to go ahead is there, it could go very quickly. Including the financing could go very quickly. I mean, the world is flush with liquidity. I mean, the problem is, do we want to go ahead or not? So to me, this is the most important question, is to have a clear mandate. With a clear mandate, we could move quite quickly.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lucrezia. For those participating on the webinar, thank you very much for all the questions that you have sent in. Thank you in particular to Lucrezia and Larry for participating in this webinar and for your leadership on the trustee task force in this most important area. For those listening, there will be a copy of this recording which will be available in approximately 90 minutes from the conclusion of this webinar, and also the slides that Lucrezia used for a presentation will be available as well. I'd just like to finally recognise the team at the IFRS Foundation who have made bringing the webinars to life. Thank you very much for all that you're doing, and at times doing it in quite difficult COVID circumstances. Much appreciated, and thank you very much. Goodbye.